Well, I want to welcome today one of my closest friends. He's been a royal pain. You know what good friends are? They're always there to kind of remind you to keep your feet on the ground and remember who you are. But we've been through a lot together. He's a true brother. But more importantly, he's one of the most highly effective individuals I've ever met. I met him as a pastor, and he was pastoring in the middle of nowhere, it seemed, and there was explosive growth. I've watched him go to one of the largest churches in the country and try to help them through some transitions. And now today, he's both pastoring and leading one of the most effective ministries I know, when I believe it's called Living Out the Gospel. I mean, he is there for virtually every need people in his community have through this organization. And I'm going to ask him to tee that up for us. But I want to welcome Dr. Ike Reichard.
Thank you, Jay. It's an honor to be with you. And that friendship goes back a lot of years. And you've always been that consistent voice in my life of encouragement and motivation. And I'm honored to be on your program today. So thank you for the opportunity.
Man. And I'm glad we're getting that recorded. Ike, there's a couple phrases that I want to ask you about, and then we're going to do a deep sea dive into your remarkable journey. Not only your personal journey, but your leadership journey. And I mean it when I say you're one of the most generous but highly effective individuals I know. And, ever since you met me, things just began to blossom.
Yeah, it's been incredible. Up until that moment, everything was just pretty much in neutral. But after meeting Jay Strack, I promise you, anyone who meets Jay Strack knows there's a dynamism, there's a catalytic event that takes place, and you never quite know what you're going to do. So I'm still trying to figure out if this is a real podcast or if I'm getting pranked today. So I guess I'll find out.
Well, some things are not yet ready for you to be revealed to you. All right.
That's right.
Ike, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the phrase, "There's always a way"? Now, I say that prefacing, you've gone through some of the most difficult moments an individual can go through. You've gone through certain transitions and changes in your life. And so when I ask that question, I ask it to a lot of people. But when I ask it to you, I got pen in hand, because you have proven in your life that resiliency, there's always a way. But what's the first thing that comes to mind when you read that phrase, hear that phrase?
That change is inevitable, but growth is optional. We're all going to go through changes in our life, and we can get upset about those changes. We can argue about those changes. But if we are really wise, we can grow in the midst of those changes. And there's nothing like resiliency to be able to build a person, to be able to take on even greater challenges in life. I guess that's why when people who go to the gym, you and I are not included in that, but they go in and they do resistance training. They're constantly working those muscles, and they use resistance to be able to build up the muscle to be able to take on more. And so I think it's that way in life. We live in an imperfect world. We live in a world where things happen that maybe we wouldn't have chosen to happen, but then we get to make the choice. And, Jay, I know you love the book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And to me, the quote out of that book is when he says, the last human freedom that you and I have is our ability to choose our attitude in any given set of circumstances. So every day you get to choose your attitude. That's why I say change is inevitable. It's going to happen. But now your growing opportunity is optional.
Ike, isn't it amazing how many leadership books or even biographies we'll read that somebody somehow refers to Viktor Frankl?
It's incredible when you see lists of famous people and they list like 10 books that have influenced their life. They'll easily, for me, it's usually about 70% of those people will list that book and the amazing way that he chose his attitude. And I was first exposed to it in college. And I had a dean, Gene Hendricks, who said, there's a book that I want you to read, because I grew up in kind of a different type of situation in that my parents were children of the Great Depression, and they only had a 5th grade education. And so education wasn't really something that, was valued in my family. And so when I finally got to college, really at the age of 23, because I flunked out when I was 17 years old, totally unequipped to go to college. It was going and meeting her that became the catalyst in my life to help change. And that book, I go back to it all the time. I reread it constantly because it just shows the power that is ours if we choose to exercise it, that in any given set of circumstances. And here's a man, in concentration camps and watches everyone in his family die with the exception of one sister, but still would say that our last human freedom is our ability to choose our attitude in any given set of circumstances. It inspires me every day.
Wow. Now, Ike, you're a big proponent of leading change. We've talked about the classic book by John Cotta, and amazing book, article. One of the things we're doing is we're trying to also not only teach that remarkable book, but we're also trying to stress the Bridges model of transition,
right?
Managing transitions. Couple quotes on that. Ralph Waldo Emerson. You're my quote guy, so I always try to have a couple quotes, and maybe you haven't recently. But Emerson said, not in his goals, but in his transitions, man is great. That's a great insight.
It is, because we're all going to hit transitions. And how do you manage those transitions? I can't remember where I first heard it, but someone said the definition of transition is when change has changed. And all of a sudden you're at a brand new place. You're at a place where, the caterpillar is going to become a butterfly. There's a metamorphosis that takes place, or, when we read in scripture, it's a transformation that takes place. And to me, that's really what transitions are about. They're transformation opportunities for us.
Wow, great insight. Now, Ike, another quote is by Susan Bridges. There's the Bridges model of transition that corporations have used for many, many years. And it's, William Bridges, and of course his wife Susan. Here's what Susan Bridges said: the essence of life takes place in the neutral zone, that phase of transition. It's in the interim spaciousness that all possibilities, creativity, and innovative ideas can come to life and flourish. So the Bridges model of transition, as you well know, the ending of what is, the neutral zone, and then the new beginnings. And so, Ike, I want you, if you would, because you've gone through some endings of what is, and you've been through the neutral zone, but I want to touch on those briefly. But you were the man that came to mind, because I believe if anybody understands new beginnings, it's Ike Reichard. And of course, endings, what is, how we deal with endings, how we value the relationships that we've had, how we honor those that we want to honor. But yet then you go through that time where you begin to dream and plan, maybe this is what the Lord may have for me. But of course, then there's that new beginning. So we know that change is external, but transition is that internal psychological process that we go through, where we got to manage our emotions and our actions. So, Ike, let's just start a little bit with your journey. I want to later dive into your leadership journey because, as I've said, I consider you one of the most effective leaders I know. Also, we had a book that was read for our course called Humble Leadership, and you're one of those I think of. Now, not in how you treat me, but how you seem to manage to do that for everybody else on the planet. But I'm not taking it personal. So, Ike, let's talk for a second about your journey. I met you 40 years ago, and 40 plus, probably longer than either one of us want to admit. And I watched you lead a church, like I said, in the middle of nowhere, it seemed. But man, it was alive, it was packed, people were saved, and it was very obvious your people loved you. And I was privileged to come back a couple times, and every time I came, I was blown away. But you didn't spend your life there. Some things happened along the way. So share with us a little bit of your journey.
Well, I was very blessed to go to New Hope Baptist Church in Fayetteville, Georgia. I'd only been a Christian about 3 years. And I started out as a janitor and a youth minister in a church. And my actual job description, Jay, said 20% of my time would be being the student pastor and 80% was janitorial. So I thought philosophically, what they're saying is if our kids go down the toilet, at least there'll be clean toilets. And so that's where I started my journey in the church world, was being that janitor and youth director. And while I was at Mercer University, I met this great guy named Richard Lee. And Richard, Dr. Lee, was the pastor at this little country church down in a place called Fayetteville, Georgia. And he invited me to be his summer youth minister. And so eventually it turned into being his regular youth minister. We had a great time together. And then after a couple of years, Richard felt the call to go somewhere else. And in all honesty, the church, there was only myself, a part-time minister of music, and a secretary. And the part-time minister of music had a great secular job, and the secretary didn't feel led to preach. So they said, Ike, how would you like to take this on? And the guy who actually asked me to take it on was named Ken Turner. And Ken Turner said, Brother Ike, he was from up in North Georgia. He said, Williams wants you to be our interim pastor. And I said, what is an interim pastor? And he said, that means you're going to preach till we get somebody we really want to hear. And I went, oh, an interim pastor. I got you. And so for 9 months, I was the interim pastor. And, Jay, you could try to figure out why things happen the way they happen. What's the triggering mechanism? What is it that happens? It's hard to explain what happened at New Hope because Dr. Lee knew more about churches and his little finger than I knew in my entire body. He was the child of a minister, his brother's a minister, and Richard's one of the smartest guys I've ever encountered. And he had done a great job of leading, but we were a church that was running maybe about 280 people or something like that, a good sized country church. And over the next few years, it was an explosion of growth. Now, it also helps that for 5 years in a row, Fayette County was the fastest growing county in America. If you're going to try to have a fast growing church, go to where the community is growing. So I was there at the right time. It was all the right intersections came together. And so that church in the Southern Baptist Convention at the time, there were like 36,000 plus churches. And we became in a 5-year growth study, the second fastest growing church in America for Southern Baptist. But this is the one you'll really appreciate. We were number one fastest growing church for 10 years in a row on a septic tank. Now that is very important to understand. That was the definition was you were a rural church if you were on a septic tank, and New Hope was definitely a rural church. So all of that was happening out in a place where you told me you fired your staff. when you showed up the first morning because you couldn't figure out where anyone was going to come from?
On the drive there, I'm thinking of people that on my staff need to be get a new beginning somewhere else, because I'm not going to be anybody there and nothing's going to happen.
Well, the great thing about being out that far was that we were able to start buying land. And so when I became pastor, we had about 2.5 acres of land. When I left, they have nearly 300 acres of land for that church. And the church has continued to do extraordinarily well. They called a gentleman named John Avant in as pastor for a number of years. And now Reese Stenner is the pastor there. And both of those guys, they had different gifts than I have. And for John Avant, he had a real focus on reaching the world, that and revival. That was kind of his strengths. And Reese has come in and done as good a job of taking a community that was transitioning racially in a lot of ways. Fayette County is really extremely well known for Black entrepreneurs, and that county has just flourished. And what Reese has managed to do there is to build one of the best multicultural churches in the country. So I feel very privileged. I just went back and did an event at the church for their deacons and wives recently. And to have those kind of relationships and those kind of friendships, means the world to me.
Well, I've watched you rejoice in the growth and all the changes that have happened. And a lot of times, when we leave, either we're not interested or we go, well, I wish this guy's good, but I wish, I love the way you've always accentuated the positive. And in fairness, it's pretty easy to do because, like you said, those are some remarkable leaders that came. Now, Ike, you thought you were going to be there the rest of your life.
I did. Absolutely thought I would be there the rest of my life. And then I got a phone call from Dr. Charles Stanley at First Baptist Church in Atlanta. And he asked me to come and to preach at their North location where Andy Stanley have been preaching. And then there was a division there that took place, and Andy left to go out to start North Point Church. And so I went out and I preached there at that church. And he called me back a few days later and said, I really believe that you're supposed to be on this staff and that you're supposed to be the next pastor here one day. And so that was pretty overwhelming because I'm sitting there thinking I'm going to be in Fayetteville, Georgia. There was something, I think I romanticized the idea of being a one church pastor. This is where I'm going to go. This is where I'm going to stay. I love the community, loved everything about it. It's a great place to raise your children. And I'll be forever grateful for those years there, but did go to First Baptist Atlanta, was there less than a year and knew that culturally and chemistry wise, I was not the right fit for the church. And, people always are kind to talk about my successes. You and I have a mutual friend, and you've been on this podcast, and Mike Lynch. And Mike grew up there at New Hope, and he was interviewing me on his podcast. And he was talking about all the wonderful things that I've got to participate in. So I said, but Mike, let's talk about the failures. And he kind of laughed. I said, no, seriously, people identify more with failures. And do you define it as a failure, or do you see it as a transition in your life? And it was a transition for me. I don't think there was any other place, Jay, that someone would have issued a call to me that I would have left New Hope for, other than to go to the First Baptist Church of Atlanta. And I planted my roots so deep there that it was going to be hard for God to move me from there. And I had this image in my mind as I went through this transition of being a potted plant, and you're inside a container, and that container is going to determine how much you can grow. And what God did was he uprooted me and he moved me into a different container. And I went to First Baptist Atlanta, and I learned some amazing things. And Dr. Stanley, every time I ever heard him preach there, was just absolutely off the charts. I mean, he just did a tremendous job. And so I get to go to the North location, and I just take this phrase for a moment. I got to replace Andy Stanley. Fat chance that's going to happen for anyone. Andy is a tremendous communicator, as we all know. And so I got to go to that location, build a lot of friendships, learned a lot of things there. And then when I left, something I'd always thought that I would want to do, but I never had the courage to do it, was to plant a church from scratch, to go out into an area. So I didn't go back to the south side of Atlanta, which I had the opportunity to do. I was still living there. The church still had not called a new pastor. And one day the chairman of the deacons and the pastor search team chairman came to my house and sat down and said, why don't you come back home? Why don't you allow us to put your name in at New Hope? I'm still living in the community. But Jay, I had prayed through that with my wife, and I knew that I was supposed to go on this journey. And so the easiest thing in the world for me would have been to embrace that opportunity. So then in the middle of this,
how many people could even have that choice, Ike? So number one, part of this whole managing transitions is that you have to leave well. And, it's where you care so much about the people that are there.
Right.
That, so how many people can even go back? So that was a great compliment in itself.
It surely was. And, I always tell people who are transitioning, walk across and build a bridge that you can walk back across one day. There's two ways for you to have the biggest, building in town. You can build yours the biggest, or you can try to tear everybody else's down. And I really believe in trying to build, the taller buildings and to do the right thing. So I get to go there to First Baptist Atlanta, and I learn a lot of great things. And so I'm coming out. Now the problem is I'm in the neutral time that you're talking about. I'm in that quiet time. What do you do when one thing has ended and now the next thing has not yet appeared? And I can tell you, it sure makes your wife nervous. I can remember very vividly one day because, and Jay, here was the amazing thing to me. When I left First Atlanta, I did something I tell every young preacher, never do this. And then I had to turn around and do it. And that is, do not leave somewhere with somewhere else to go. Never leave in a void, because people will go, well, I wonder what happened. I wonder what took place. So I always had that great advice for everyone. Well, then I'm in that transition moment. Now, you'd have to know that I've had a job ever since I was 10 years old. I've had a job. I've never been in between. And now I'm in the land of in between. It's the land between this is ended, but not yet. What do you do with those neutral times? There's a lot of very positive things that you can do. One, you can evaluate where you've been, and you can take nuggets from where you've been, what you've learned, what insights did you gain, and you can begin to build on that. It's also an incredible time for you to begin to evaluate your own life. What is it that you really want to do with your life? And I wish that Simon Sinek's book would have been around then. It would have sure been a help. Start with why, because I would have taken that golden circle and I would have started right there in the middle with why. And so I was doing it my way to try to make some determinations. And so I was very fortunate. Our good friend, Bob Reichard, was at the North American Mission Board at the time, and they were looking for a director of evangelism for North America. And so they had asked me, would I be interested in that opportunity? There was a church down in your state that was looking for a pastor. And so that was an opportunity. There was also an opportunity for my wife. She's from the Knoxville area, and her family's home church was opened. And when I used to go on vacation there, they would ask me to come in and preach. And so that church was open. And so there were all these doors that were possibilities. And so I'm sitting at the breakfast table one morning, and Robin is standing there. The girls had gone off to school, and she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know." I'm in that land of in between, right? You're trying to figure it out. And I said, I don't know right now. She said, "Well, let me ask you this question." She said, "If you could wave the magic wand that you always talk about, what would you do?" And I said, "I would probably go out and start a church from scratch, because I've got this whole notebook that I've kept through the years of what I would do if I started a church myself." And I said, "I'd probably go out and I would start a church." And she said, "Then why don't you do that?" And I said, "Rob, do you realize how hard it is? You're starting with nothing. I mean, no one's guaranteeing your salary. You got to start." And I said, "And so I've got you and I've got our girls." And so she goes, so let me ask you this. If it were just you by yourself, would you start a church?" And I went, "Yeah, I would." She said, "So you think that God can take care of you, but he can't take care of you and the wife that he's given you and your 2 children." I hate it when they become the Holy Spirit in our life. And so I'm sitting there, and she said, "You know what you need to do?" And I said, "Yes, I do." So I left, and I went away for like 6 days. And I went up to North Georgia. Wonderful friend, a mutual friend of ours, Al Holly, hooked me up with a place in North Georgia. And I went there, and I spent those days, 6 days, fasting, praying, a yellow legal pad, a big rollerball ink pen, and my Bible. And I just said, "God, I have to get a word from you." So, Jay, if I was going to give you a scripture, when you're in the in-between time, it's Habakkuk chapter 2. And I love that passage. "Then the Lord answered me and said, record the vision and inscribe it on tablets." The first part of that is, "Then the Lord answered me." So the first place we got to start is we got to start with praying. He's saying the Lord answered him because he was praying and he was asking God for guidance. In those times that are in between, they can be some of the greatest spiritual growth times that you've ever experienced. It can be the roadmap to increasing your capacity as a leader in every facet of your life. So record the vision.
Forgive me. Is that true for students? Is that true for maybe somebody about to graduate? Is that true for businessmen, businesswomen? When all of a sudden the economy's, I mean, who knows the circumstances behind it? But do you think that advice is transferable?
Oh, I absolutely is. No question. Because listen to what he says. Jay, you teach goal setting. Student Leadership University's always taught goal setting. That's a key component to what you've done. He says, record the vision and inscribe it on tablets. He's talking about writing down your goals. And then he gives one of the greatest psychological insights here that I know of. He says that the one who reads it may run. The single biggest problem that you face in a downtime is thinking you just totally shift to neutral, and you can't do that because the law of inertia will take over. And the law of inertia, as we all remember from 8th grade physics, is that an object at rest will tend to stay at rest until an object of greater force comes along. And for the human mind, and it's all based in the reticular activating system of your brain, that's the place where you make the decisions to move forward and not to get stuck. Never mistake being stuck with being in neutral during a time of transition. Times of transition are forward moving. It's where you need to be thinking more. It's where you need to be writing more. It's where you need to be journaling more. It's where you need to be dreaming more about what is the life. And yes, get the book, Start With Why, go to TED Talks, watch Simon Sinek on there, and listen to the things he has to say. So he's going to help you break the law of inertia. And that's the difficult thing, Jay, when you're in the middle of transitions. If you do not handle them wisely, you can get stuck in the neutral and you can get discouraged and motivation seems to evaporate and you lose the thing that all of us, it's our best friend, and that's big Mo, right? Momentum. John Maxwell, our buddy, is fond of saying, when you've got momentum, you're not nearly as good as you look. And when you don't have momentum, you're not nearly as bad as you appear. And you need momentum on your side. So he's saying, I want to help you get a vision for your life. And the Bible says, without a vision, people will perish. You can put it into everyday language. Without a dream, you get stuck. So what goals do is they give you guardrails in your life to get you faster to the opportunities that you want to be able to pursue in life. So he goes on and he says, inscribe it on tablets, the one who reads it may run, for the vision is yet for the appointed time. So Jay, here's what I found in my life. Every God-given dream I've ever had goes through a cycle. There'll be the birth of that dream. And man, I'll get excited. This is fantastic, man. This is the answer. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And then you go from that aspiration and you're trying to get to accomplishment, but in between is something called execution. And it's in the execution that the energy can sometimes go out. When you have the birth of that dream, there's excitement, there's joy. And man, you see artist renderings. But you don't build a building with artist renderings. You got to have blueprints. And so if you don't have those blueprints, you're going to have a very faulty, building. A friend of mine named Jay once said, if you have a faulty foundation, you're going to fizzle at the finish. And so I've always tried to keep that in my mind. But every God-given dream I've had, birth of that vision, whoo, this is great. Then the death of the vision. You find out how much it's going to cost. What? Oh man, you can't get the permits. We built a 136-bed brand new homeless shelter here for 2 years. For 2 years, we were in neutral because of a zoning variance of 90 feet on 6.5 acres of land. 90 feet, 2 years over, being able to build this building. There were times it felt like, well, that dream, it's dying. That it's not going to happen. So there's the birth of the dream, the death of the dream, and then there's the rebirth of that dream. And that's when things begin to come together. And that's when those answered prayers begin to connect. And you've got to have that vision. And for the last 15 years of my life, I've been living by the mantra, the day that your memories are greater than your dreams, you're dead in the water. Yesterday was great and yesterday was fine, but you got to have a dream. Or as Babe Ruth put it in sports terminology, yesterday's home runs don't win today's games. And you've got to have those home runs today, that home run dream, that home run vision that motivates you, gets you up in the morning, you're excited and you're thrilled because you have something that's going to help change the world in a positive way. And so when you manage those times, when you're in between, what has been is no longer, what's going to be not yet has really clarified for you and had focus. And understand that when you're in that neutral position, if you ever get to 75 to 80% sure, start moving forward. Because if you wait till you're 100% sure that everything is going to work, you're probably never going to get started.
Now, I'm listening to you. Of course, I've known you forever, but I'm listening to you. The optimism, the resiliency, the positivity. but yet I know you've gone through some of the most difficult moments on the planet. And how do you explain to someone who's going through that unbelievable moment that there really is a light somewhere? You may not see it, you may not believe there'll be, but I've watched you go through some difficult times, and I've always been amazed at how whatever moment you were in, you were there. So if you were grieving, you were grieving. And when you were trying to comfort others, and I watched you when you were the one that everybody was coming to comfort, and you spent more time helping all those people, you comforted those. So tell us just a little bit, Ike, because I want to refer to your remarkable book, Treasures in the Darkness, one of the greatest books. We still hand it out. We still recommend it. But I know you're proud of that book, but you paid a high price to be able to write that book.
I did. I'll start with a quote by Charles Haddon Spurgeon. He said, "God is too good to be unkind. He's too wise to be mistaken." And when you can't trace his hand, meaning you don't understand things, when you can't trace his hand, you can trust his heart. And 40 years ago, last week, was the anniversary of my wife, Cindy, and my unborn child dying during childbirth. And Jay, you were there for me. Man, I'll get emotional even thinking about it, but you helped to do the funeral. You helped to walk me through. It was your home that I came to when I left to try to recuperate and to get myself back together. And I'll be forever grateful for that, because you helped to guide me in so many different ways, calling and checking on me. It occurred to me the other day, you jumped on a plane and you came to my home, and you stayed there with me. I had no idea. I know how busy you are. I know you were probably in the middle of speaking and having to do a million different things, but you know, the definition of a friend is the person who walks in the room when everybody else is walking out. And you walked into that room, and I will always be thankful. But how do you get past those kinds of things? And I can remember vividly, I was in downtown Atlanta. I had just gone on a hospital visit, and it was a couple who had had a child, and the child had beautiful red hair. And my wife was a redhead that passed away. And I always thought I'd have a redheaded, little girl. And it just kind of tore my heart out, And people sometimes, they wonder, how can you trust God when you go through this? Aren't you mad at him? Weren't you upset? Well, of course, I went through those things. But Jay, I learned a long time ago, a troubled faith is better than no faith at all. Mm-hmm. There's times your faith is going to be troubled. There's time darkness is going to be all around you, but you don't have to let the darkness get inside of you. And you work through those times. And that's where you have to trust God. And I trust in his sovereignty. I trust in his providence, that there's a purpose that maybe I can't see. I lean into Isaiah 55:8. For my ways are not your ways, and my thoughts are not your thoughts, says the Lord. My ways are higher than yours. And so there's the element that you've got to lean into your faith like never before. And when you find out that Jesus is all you have, you find out really he's all you need. And, you're thankful for your friends. You're thankful for the people that are walking you through. But at the end of the day, you've got to make choices. So here I am. I'm outside the hospital, and I had a young guy on my staff, Rodney Shell, that was with me that day. And I told Rodney when we walked out, I said, Rodney, it's a Friday afternoon downtown Atlanta. And I go, Rodney, I don't want to get back in the car right now. I said, I'm just going to walk. And he goes, where are you going to walk? And I said, meet me down at Woodruff Park. It was right in downtown Atlanta. And he goes, you're crazy. It was hot. And I said, I got to walk, got to get out some energy here. So I walked downtown, and on a Friday afternoon, there was a concert in the park. All these people, I see moms coming in, and they're hugging their husbands. And I see all these families. And I'm realizing, it's like a family concert and everything. And I kind of just stepped back mentally from this. And I'm thinking, you could give up just lay down and die because you've lost your best friend who happens to be your wife, and you lost your child, and you waited 11 years. We tried for 11 years to get pregnant, and finally it happens. And now this happens. And you can get mad at God and you can give up. And if you lay down and die, it'll be the most romantic thing in the world. And people go, my goodness, didn't he love her so much? He couldn't live without her. But would that really say a whole lot about God? Would that really say much about my relationship with him and how he can sustain us? And as clear as a bell that day, I thought, I'm going to live my story now the way I want to be able to tell it later and not have to change a thing. Just make the choices now. It's like when I'm in a business meeting, and like with Musk, we've grown enormously, and we're facing some real challenges right now moving forward with a lot of things. And I will sit in a meeting and I will think to myself, what would a great leader do in this situation? What would a great leader do? And so I'll pull from stories in my mind, Abraham Lincoln, John Kennedy, all of these different great leaders down through the years that have impacted my life to make that kind of a decision. On the spiritual side, when I'm facing things, I do the same thing, but I'm pulling Bible verses that I've memorized. And I'm pulling stories from the Bible that I go, now, how did Jesus handle this? And so if you want to ask yourself, what would a great leader do? He's a great one to start with. He seems to be at the top of the list. And, Jim Collins, who wrote Good, Great, and Built to Last, he describes what's called a level 5 leader. And he says, a level 5 leader combines two very unusual things. They have fierce determination, but they have great humility. And those are rare qualities that you see together in a leader. The fierce determination to have tenacity and not give up when things are going bad, not to, throw your hands in the air and go, gosh, the sky is falling. But how are you going to lead people through those transitions? Because companies go through them. You go through them in your personal life. You're going to go through them in your company. We're going through transitions right now in our society. We're watching things change. We're seeing people in school boards that are saying, well, we don't want to take any students in this university because it's a Christian university, so we don't want them teaching our children. We're seeing transitions in thought. We're seeing transitions in the spiritual world because we've gone into a postmodern world where Christianity is not the prevailing thought within our society. That's a huge transition. How are churches going to navigate that? How are we going to have fidelity to the Word of God and yet at the same time have the ability to outreach and to be able to reach people and to be able to bring them in and to somehow change the perception that when you think of Christianity, all you think is what they're against, and learn in a way by the things we do to turn it to, instead of what they're against, what are they for? What are the things that they're doing? In our church at Piedmont, one of our core values is we want to be known for how much we give, not how much we ask for. We just want to be known in our community as a giving church. And so a transition in a church is something that a lot of pastors are facing right now. And 4,500 churches a year closing their doors because they didn't transition. And change is inevitable. Growth is optional. And learning to move through those transitions and to do the right thing, prayer, Bible study, the core things that we would tell any believer and follower of Christ to do, but then be smart. Read the secular work that's there. Look at, the John Cotters and gain insight from them and so many others that we all learn from. And you're one of those guys, you are that constant learner. And our buddy John Maxwell had been doing a series lately on some of his podcasts, and he was talking about having a personal growth plan. What is that personal growth plan? Just a sliver of mine was that dean at Mercer University said, I'm going to challenge you I was 24 when she did this. She said, I'm going to challenge you to read at least one new book a week. And that's been what I've done for all of those years. Sometimes I've gone back and reread the same book. The classic book is the old analogy is it's like a milk cow. It gives you something fresh every day. And great books are that way, to go back and pick up the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Good to Great, all of these kinds of books. But start with the book of Habakkuk. Yeah. Record your vision, inscribe it on tablets. And it says, although the vision may tarry, you wait for it, it'll surely come. Yes, sir. So when it says it may tarry, that's the neutral times, Jay.
Yeah, no question. Well said, buddy. You referenced this guy named John Maxwell. He's been a great friend to both of us.
Sure has.
Because I like to let John know I'm a better leader than he is. When I met John, he wasn't John Maxwell. Now, ever since he met me, look where he's at.
That's right.
He's a better leader because I met him, and yet, so anyway, that I just try to always encourage, but John Maxwell did a great job of helping, I hope I say this right, married, it's the marriage of spiritual leadership with what you need to know to be a leader. And how do you earn the right to lead? And I mean, he's just always done a great job building that bridge, able to speak to the corporate world, but yet everything he's saying is built on the word. He doesn't always give a Bible address for it in a secular environment, but then he'll stay over, at a huge gathering and go, now in the morning, this is optional. This is for free. This is optional. I'm going to talk to you about 2 or 3 things that absolutely changed my life. And there he is, Bible in hand, so you and I are grateful for folks like that. And Ike, you've been that for a lot of people. One of the quotes that rocked my world early on because of my past, and you know that story quite well, probably hear it in your sleep, but it was entitled, Don't Waste Your Sorrows. Don't waste your sorrows. And whenever I describe your book, Treasures in the Darkness, I say, here's a man that walked through the valley of the shadow of death, walked through the darkness, the pain, the agony, and yet he's not wasting that. Give us just a word on the book, Treasures in the Darkness. Where'd you get the title, first of all? It's a fabulous title.
Isaiah 45:3. God says, I will show you treasures in darkness, and I will show you riches in secret places, so that you will know it is I, the Lord God, who calls you by name. I think the most profound thought I've ever had is that God knows my name. He knows who I am. He knows everything about me, and he loves me more than anybody else that loves me. And that is a profound thought for me. So when I always think of God, I think of this loving, incredible Father that I've been blessed to have in my life. And yeah, I've gone through those tough times and those heartaches, and you should never waste your grief. And maybe it's never occurred to you that your story is not for you, it's actually for other people. It's like sometimes when I'm doing that book a week reading, sometimes I read books that I don't necessarily have an interest in that field, but I know someone that does. And maybe I'm building a relationship with them. So I want to know more to be able to help them. But, Jay, sometimes relationships even shift around this. You and I both have someone that was so key in our life, Zig Ziglar. We both loved Zig. I mean, Zig was the guy. And he's the one that introduced me to John Maxwell when John was still running tapes in his garage out in San Diego. Zig said, there's a guy you need to meet that you guys are a lot alike, and I think you'll really, enjoy getting to know each other. And Zig was always a connector that way. So that's part of where I love to connect people, because look at the way that Zig connected me and then connected you and I. I mean, those connections mean the world. And Zig was just that guy. And he was my mentor. And every Saturday morning, Zig would call me and we would go over together his Sunday school lesson that he was going to teach that Sunday. For years, he was at the First Baptist Church in Dallas. And then he's with your best buddy, Jack Graham, out there at Prestonwood Baptist, truly one of the great churches in America and one of the prince preachers. Jack Graham, you just don't get any better than him. And so Zig, being the kind of guy that he was that mentor that I loved. But then one night I got a call and Zig said, Ike, I really need to talk to you. And I said, okay. And he started telling me about his daughter and that his daughter had been diagnosed with an incurable lung disease. And that night, our roles reversed. There's a book called Sheltering Trees that was written a few years ago. And Sheltering Trees about the power of friendships. And they did mine and Zig's story. So you hear me talk about our relationship through my lens, and then you hear Zig talk about our relationship through his lens. And it was during that time that now I was being the mentor to Zig, which is even still hard for me to even say something like that. But I had walked, as you said, through the valley of the shadow of death. And now here was a father that was about to do the most unnatural thing a human being ever does, and that is to watch their child die and to be able to do nothing about it. And when we were going through that experience, that's where the role reversal happened. And so we walked through that experience together. If I hadn't have walked there, then I couldn't have helped the guy that is my hero. The man that did so much for me, because, you know, Jay, you and I, our careers and callings are so much alike because you flunked out of college as well. I just wanted to make sure I got that in there.
Well, first of all, not college, just flunked out of high school.
Oh, was that all you flunked out of?
I got in, I was turned down 13 colleges. And then Charleston Southern took a chance.
I know.
Academic probation, which I tell everybody is youth pastors' love language, academic probation. But so I was able to, by the grace of God, navigate that. But so let the record show, you know.
Well, for me, it was going to Kennesaw Junior College. And before the year was out, I had flunked out. And I've had people try to make me feel better. They go, well, you probably weren't trying. Yes, I was. I was trying as hard as I could. There was a war going on. Everyone was trying to stay in school, but I just wasn't wired for it. Again, having parents with a fifth grade education, we couldn't afford a tutor. My dad worked in rock quarries all of his life. That was his life. And we just didn't have a lot of things for me to have availed myself of. And so having that kind of an experience was tough. So I become a Christian. First time I flunked out of college, well, not a Christian. Early 20s, become a Christian. Our mutual friend, John Yarborough, led me to Christ. And then someone gave me a book called See You at the Top. Except at the time it had a different title. It was like Pump Handles, Fleas, and Biscuits, which I bet that sold a bunch of copies right there. See You at the Top sure worked out well for Zig. But I read that book, set the first goal that I'd ever set in my life, which was to go to college. And college changed the trajectory of my life. I know it's not for everyone, but boy, it was the thing in my life that changed everything. So I actually end up starting college at 23 years old and went to Mercer University, Atlanta, which turned me down 3 times. And I came in on academic probation and ended up graduated magna cum laude. I would have settled for laude, have mercy, but magna cum laude was pretty cool. And then, as you know, went ahead and did a master's and did a doctorate. And even my doctorate was around the idea of transitions, Jay, because I was at the time I was at New Hope Church. And so the paper was around the idea of how do you transition a local rural church to a suburban regional church? How does the structure have to change? How does staffing have to change? What are all the things that you've got to do in order to take on that kind of growth in a very rapid period? How do you balance the finances? How do you do all those kinds of things? How do you build buildings and make it work? So my whole life has really been around transitions.
That's why I thought of you. Developing these courses on transitions, and I go, man, do I know the poster child for transitions.
He gets fired a lot. That's called a brand new start.
But let me just say, you do it better than anybody I know getting fired. I just want to give you that shout out.
I actually leave on a friendly relationship. That's what's awesome.
I know it. I've never seen anything quite like it. You know, you've been able to, well, you value people and you care about people and you don't want to burn bridges. No. And it's amazing how even when there's been a transition and we move on, New Hope's always been a source of encouragement and support for you, no matter where you go, right?
Oh,
so everywhere you've been, you know, even when you move somewhere else, it's those relationships are alive. Of course, you love whoever that leader is now. You know, you build him up. It's never about, you know, trying to be that guy. Well, I don't know why he did that. You were always a builder. But today, you have one of the most remarkable ministries I know of. You are leading. I mean, that by itself, besides pastoring a great church in Atlanta, but tell us about this ministry that's meeting so many needs.
I'd love to, Jay. Thanks for the opportunity. It's called MUST Ministries, M-U-S-T. It's an acrostic that stands for Ministries United Serving and Training. It's 51 years old and is an amazing organization. The headquarters is located in Cobb County. We serve roughly 12 counties around the metropolitan Atlanta area, including downtown Atlanta. And we do basically 5 things, Jay. And when I tell people what MUST is, I always say, have the image of someone on a high wire, right? They got the balancing pole and they're trying to get across that high wire. And a lot of things can knock them off. You know, not everyone's the great Walendas and can make it from one side of the Grand Canyon to the other, right? And so a lot of people get knocked off. And when they do, they start falling through the air. MUST is the safety net underneath the high wire. And we're not a hammock for people to lay in and be lazy, but we're a safety net to be able to catch people when they're falling. Now, what might knock you off the high wire is vastly different than what might knock someone else off. For us, it might be a health reversal. Might be you and Diane have gone through so much with Diane over these last few years, and that could knock you off the high wire, because the high wire is just an image of you're walking, you're making progress, everything's going great, right? And so you get knocked off. MUST helps to take care of people in poverty that a flat tire might knock them off the wire. Here in metropolitan Atlanta, Jay, I don't know the statistic for in Orlando, but here in Atlanta, 47% of people could not meet a $450 emergency if they had it. 47% of people. And it's getting worse. It's not getting better. And with inflation, the average family in Atlanta is paying $456 more a month for the services than what it cost them last year. So you combine all of those different things, and we work with a lot of people who get caught in poverty. So we have a homeless shelter. That homeless shelter takes care of 136 people permanently. And I mean permanent beds. And then we have 36 beds that are called respite beds, which is when cold weather happens. And it can be a life-threatening emergency, the level of cold here in Atlanta. So we have space for people to be able to come. But then we do other housing as well. So during the height of the pandemic, 1,500 people a night were putting their head on a pillow that Must Ministries helped to provide, whether it was in hotels, motels, townhomes, you name it, apartment complexes. That's what we were doing, was helping to give people a safe night of rest. So that's one aspect of what we do. And then we feed people. This past summer, you love students, so you'll love this. We produced 535,000 summer lunches for kids who were off during that 9-week stretch during the summer, when a lot of them are not going to be able to eat. We also, at the homeless shelter, we help to feed people, and we help to feed people who are living outside, who choose not to come into a program. And then we have embedded 30 food pantries inside of schools that serve over 100 schools altogether. We have a lot of elementary and middle that are built side by side here in Georgia. And so we have those pantries inside of schools that are helping to take care of kids. And then this past year, we bought a bus, a city bus, and have it retrofitted. It's called Mobile Must. So last Friday morning, Jay, I was out helping to load cars and hanging out with people. They actually gave me a sign that just said stop and go. That was really my main job. It felt like I was at a NASCAR event. Just keep watching to the left, watch to the left. And so we're out there hanging out. Over 1,200 people got food this past Friday. We're putting food boxes into trunks. So we feed an awful lot of people. Those food pantries in schools are crucial. The Mobile Must this past year, over 17,000 people were fed through Mobile Must. That's unique individuals, 17,000. Altogether this past year, Must touched over 60,000 unique individuals. And when I say unique, that's important because we do 5 things. So you might come get food from us. You might be staying with us. And by the way, we feed all those people who are in hotels as well. So it's a massive operation. So we're going to be feeding people. We're going to be sheltering people. We provide people clothing to help take care of their needs in that aspect. And then the one I love, Jay, and this is so cool, this will be right up your alley. We help people get jobs. And our workforce development team this past year helped over 400 people get jobs. It represented $12.9 million back into the economy, 12.9 million. So we've adopted this phrase. We want to create parity, not charity. Parity lifts people up. Charity makes feel like you're reaching down to them. So we try to create that parity, and we do it through the 2 key characteristics that we want to exhibit as qualities, which is, for our clients, is dignity and respect. We want to provide them dignity and respect, because it hurts. No one aspires to live in a homeless shelter. No one does. So this year, Jay, and our year starts on July 1, our fiscal year, over 500 and something people have already gotten jobs. And the way that we've increased it is we're using artificial intelligence. We're using artificial intelligence to build resumes, takes all the backgrounds of these people, and this is at no cost to individuals. And very soon we're working with a software group out of India. We're going to have an avatar that will coach people and do mock interviews with them. And all of this now is online. So you can do it 24/7. We used to do, before COVID, it was called Interface with the Client. And it was from the hours of 10 to 2 every day. You'd come in and interface. Now you can do it 24 hours a day. That artificial intelligence will say, Jay, you need to hold your shoulders back a little more. Jay, make sure you maintain eye contact when you're doing the interview. Jay, based on your resume, here's some words you need to make sure that you use in the interview that will connect to this job that you're trying to get. It's fascinating. We think that over 800 plus people will get jobs this year. And we think it's going to be close to $25 million back into the economy. Wow. But of course, with success brings stresses. You don't want to get too far out over your skis. And we're feeding so many more people than we've ever fed that it's stretching our resources. Now, the beautiful thing is we're going to be moving our offices, and we're going to be on a consolidated campus with this new homeless shelter. And it was brand new from the ground up, right? That entire project is close to $25 million. We will move into everything and we will be debt free by the time we do it, which during a pandemic is pretty amazing. And that 2 years of delay, that over a variance issue, Jay, gave us more time to raise money. And then I got to tell you this story. You know some of it. You ever get those emails? My rich uncle in whatever country died, and I want to share that wealth with you. And we always delete those kind of emails. Well, I get one that says, "Dear Dr. Reichard, wanted to congratulate you. We've observed the work that you've done and Must has done. And we're going to be contacting you again in another email. And please do not think that this is a scam." So the first thing I thought is, forgive me, it's a scam if they're telling you not to think it is. So I called my IT person here at Must, and I was in Orlando and had talked with you over at Disney. And I called my IT guy and I said, "I want you to take a look at this email because I think it may be a phishing expedition. I don't want to click on a link when I get another email." He looks at it and he goes, "No, it's a legitimate IP address. I have no idea what it's about." I get another one. "Dear Dr. Reichard, observe the work that you've done and Must has done. We're going to invite you into a process that you couldn't just apply for. You can apply for a grant from a few $1,000s up to $5 million. Please do not think this is a scam." Okay. So they send us this little report to fill out. We're used to filling out government documents that are this high. I mean, stacks. This thing is tiny. It's like 15 pages. We fill it out. Yeah, go for $5 million. We do. A few months later, a few weeks later, we get the next email. "Dear Dr. Reichard, this is to congratulate you and Must Ministries. You have been awarded $5 million, and it was signed Jeff Bezos." If you had told me that my name and Jeff Bezos would ever be on the same piece of paper, I'd go, "I don't think so," because the alphabet, Bezos is up here, Reichard is way down here. And so we were given $5 million worth of Amazon stock to help us in our process here and of what we're trying to accomplish and what we're trying to able to do. And so we used $1.5 million of that toward the homeless shelter. And the rest we've been using to help take care of all those families that come to us. Then the last piece of it is we have a healthcare clinic. And we're building, as we're building everything new, we're building a new clinic. And this time we're going to be offering dental care. And so I'm going to be calling our mutual friend, Larry Wynn, who is now the CEO of the Georgia Baptist Healthcare Foundation, to say, "Hey, buddy, come out and partner with us on something that could really impact our community." So that's the 5 things that we do.